In the autumn of 1966, in a remote desert in Uzbekistan, the Soviet Union was able to put out a 3-year-long fire in just 23 seconds with a nuclear explosion. Now that we have your attention, we're sure you have some questions. Questions like, there was a fire burning for 3 years? How does a fire burn that long without stopping? Why would they use a nuclear weapon to put it out? First, we need to go back to where it all began. On December 1, 1963, in southern Uzbekistan, workers at the Erta Bulak gas field ignored several drilling procedures, and, well, we all know that never leads to anything good. While violating these drilling procedures, they drilled a gas well known as well number 11 as deep as 2,409 meters or 1.5 miles. As they drilled, they accidentally opened a thick gas-bearing formation with 300 atmospheric pressure. This underground pressure led to a gas blowout, destroying the well's steel rigging structure. With the rigging destroyed, a column of burning fuel was shot 120 meters or around 400 feet high. Although crews tried to contain the fire, it quickly became unmanageable. It consumed more than 12 million cubic meters of gas daily, exceeding the amount needing to run many large cities. The usual means of putting out a fire were no match for well number 11. The fire continued to burn steadily for 3 years. Scientists found putting the fire out was impossible, but they did try. They turned to Russian field artillery, water cannons, and all types of engineering, but all efforts failed. Firefighters also attempted to install a cap with special pressure relief feature. The idea was that with the lid in place, they could divert the gas flow to another discharge pipe, which would lessen the pressure. In theory, it was the perfect solution to their problem, and it would allow them to get the fire back under control. In January of 1964, the partially applied cap gave firefighters a small victory. Sadly, this victory was short-lived, as numerous sulfide-enriched craters emerged and emitted toxic fumes, adding more pollution to the air. They had lost control of the situation. Everything had backfired. They needed a new plan to stop the ongoing fire. That's when they turned to a surprising solution. By the time the summer of 1966 rolled around, the Soviet officials had a new idea up their sleeve. Physicists believed that if they detonated a nuclear bomb at a depth of 1,500 meters and close to the shaft of the well, the pressure from the explosion could blow out the fire. According to their research, the bomb needed to be 30 kilotons, which is double the power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. They employed specially designed rigs to explore the idea of an underground nuclear detonation. Experts were careful that civilians, some of which were located only 27 kilometers or 17 miles away from ground zero, would be safe. It was risky and complicated, but received the green light to move forward. It was the first time the Soviets would use a peaceful nuclear explosion to stop a gas fire. They drilled 2 slightly wider than 1-foot-long wells simultaneously and as close to the oil rig as they could get. The wells were 1,400 meters, or approximately 4,593 feet deep. They were thought to be about 35 miles from the oil well. Once these wells were dug, a nuclear bomb was lowered into one of the holes. They then filled the hole with cement to help contain the explosion. They didn't want it to erupt to the surface, which we can completely understand. You'd want to have some control over a bomb with that much firepower, especially when civilians live so close by. Once everything was in place, the bomb was detonated. Pravda Vostoka of Tashkent, a Soviet newspaper, published an account of the event. On that cold autumn day in 1966, an underground tremor of unprecedented force shook the ground with a sparse grass cover on white sand. A dusty haze rose over the desert. The orange-colored torch of the blazing well diminished, first slowly, then more rapidly, until it flickered and eventually died out. For the first time in 1,064 days, quiet descended on the area. The jet-like roar of the gas well had been silenced. Just like that, the 3-year-long fire was out, and it had only taken 23 seconds. They managed to save billions of cubic meters of gas from being wasted. This was the first time in history a nuclear bomb was used to extinguish an oil fire. After the success they had in Uzbekistan, it was bound to happen again. In the following years, the Soviets were able to use their new method of controlling runaway gas and oil wells in other instances. A few months later, a fire at the Pamuk gas field spread to the surface through various boreholes. After the success at well number 11, engineers were confident that a 47-kiloton bomb at a depth of 2.44 kilometers was needed to stop the fire. They repeated the process of digging a borehole, lowering the bomb, covering it with cement, and then detonating it. Days later, the fire had stopped. In May 1972, there was a 2-year-old gas leak in Meskia gas field, which is located about 30 kilometers southeast of Mary in southeastern Turkmenistan. The Soviets used the bomb to extinguish it. That same year, in July, there was yet another gas well fire over in Ukraine. They sealed it with a 3.8 kiloton nuclear explosion, that was at a depth of over 2.4 kilometers. In 1981, the Soviets' most recent known attempt to stop a runaway well with nuclear weapons was recorded. It was at the Kumzhinskoye gas field located on the northern coast of European Russia. They detonated a 37.6 kiloton nuclear explosion at a depth of 1,511 meters. But things didn't go according to plan this time. This time, they didn't quite know the location of what needed to be sealed. There isn't much released information on the ordeal, but it seems they missed the mark. As a result, they needed to engage in further relief well drilling. Of all the explosions, it was the one at Pamuk gas field that was the deepest and most powerful. Around this time, the United States had been trying to improve the image of the nuclear bomb. That sounds like a wacky idea, but many people agreed. The attempt to improve people's opinion on the atomic bomb went about as badly as you could have anticipated. Who would have thought that terrifying weapons of mass death with apocalyptic potential wouldn't be beloved by the general public? While the Soviet Union was using bombs to put out fires, the United States started Operation Plowshare. The US government planned to test nuclear bombs to see if they could be used to excavate large caverns inside of mountains, produce steam power, or clear rough terrain to make highways. If your first thought was, but what about the radiation? You have good instincts. The vast amount of radiation from the explosions and the fact that underground caves would remain boiling hot for months after the blast proved that this idea was not all that feasible. They did find that they could produce steam when boiling underground water for steam power, but they couldn't control it. The explosion would lead to random patches of ground exploding outward, venting the radioactive steam. The Soviet Union had already been experimenting with nuclear bombs long before well number 11, too. For instance, they used a nuclear bomb in an attempt to make reservoirs. And, well, they did make a lake. The catch was that it was an irradiated lake that is still not safe to swim in. Every other use of the nuclear bomb for civil projects proved to be mistakes. It seemed the only non-violent task they could be used for was putting out gas well fires. Shortly after the Soviet Union's first successful nuclear test on August 29, 1949, the USSR's representative to the United Nations, Andrei Vyshinsky, justified their efforts to develop nuclear weapons of their own, emphasizing that this technology was only going to be used for domestic purposes. The Soviet Union did not use atomic energy for the purpose of accumulating stockpiles of atomic bombs. It was using atomic energy for purposes of its own domestic economy, blowing up mountains, changing the course of rivers, irrigating deserts, charting new paths of life in regions untrodden by human foot. Ever since 1969, the United States and the Soviet Union have exchanged information on peaceful uses of explosions. Using weapons of any kind for peaceful uses might seem silly on the surface. Still, people have been trying to figure out how to use weapons for peaceful pursuits since the beginning of civilization. One of the most famous references to this desire comes from the Book of Micah. They will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they train for war. Now that we talked about people trying to use nuclear bombs for peaceful uses, there's another interesting fact we'd love to discuss. Did you know that once upon a time, some people feared that a nuclear bomb could accidentally set the entire planet on fire? It's ironic considering how often atomic bombs have been used to put out fires. The first time this fear was raised was during the Third Reich. Hitler had discussed the possibility of physicist Werner Heisenberg, who, yes, was the namesake of Walter White's alias in Breaking Bad. Hitler was displeased with the idea that, according to Albert Speer's memoir, the Earth under his rule might be transformed into a glowing star. They had feared that they would not be able to control a successful nuclear fission reaction, or that it might set off a wider chain reaction. Thankfully for all of us, Germany had more or less given up on trying to develop a nuclear bomb by 1942. This was primarily due to logistical reasons. Meanwhile, the United States never stopped, becoming the first country to successfully create the history-changing weapon. Scientists raised fears that a single nuclear bomb could destroy the entire planet. Around the time of the Manhattan Project, which was the research and development that helped develop the first atomic weapons, physicist Edward Teller had concerns. Dr. Stephen Bogowski, the chair of nuclear and radiological engineering at Georgia Institute of Technology, stated that Teller worried that the heat from the bomb's explosion would cause the hydrogen in the atmosphere to undergo fusion, setting off a catastrophic chain reaction that would continue around the globe and destroy Earth. That's a very long and scientific way of saying he was scared they would set the world on fire. However, before the 1945 Trinity test took place, scientists already knew it was impossible to set the atmosphere on fire. In 1942, J. Robert Oppenheimer considered it as a possibility, which is why multiple scientists worked to calculate just what it would take to set the atmosphere on fire. The results showed it was incredibly impossible to do it with a nuclear weapon. The temperatures and conditions necessary for this to happen are unattainable by a nuclear bomb. In 1959, Pearl S. Buck's writings helped continue the idea that the nuclear weapons could in fact set the world on fire. Buck was an American writer and novelist known for her portrayal of Chinese peasant life and the biographies of her parents. She wrote a feature about nuclear weapons, and at the end she stated, "If, after calculation," Compton said, "it were proved that the chances were more than approximately 3 in 1 million that the Earth would be vaporized by the atomic explosion, he would not proceed with the project. Calculation proved the figure slightly less, and the project continued." This wouldn't be the only time that the idea of nuclear weapons setting the world on fire would be brought to the public discourse. In 1975, a professor of radiation physics at the University of Illinois Medical Center, Horace C. Dudley, published a letter in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. He titled it "The Ultimate Catastrophe," and he outlined a doomsday scenario in that letter. In it, he discussed an unintentional chain reaction that would destroy the entire planet. He believed that it would ignite all the nitrogen in the atmosphere and all the hydrogen in the oceans, which would melt our planet all the way to its core. He had even cited Buck's writing. Specifically, he mentioned the 3 parts in a million figure. There was a rebuttal letter from Hans Bethe, who led the T, or Theoretical Division at Los Alamos during the Manhattan Project. In the letter, Ultimate Catastrophe, that was published in the same journal, he said, "There was never any possibility of causing a thermonuclear chain reaction in the atmosphere. There was never a probability of slightly less than 3 parts in a million, as Dudley had claimed. Ignition is not a matter of probabilities, it is simply impossible." Bethe did share Dudley's opposition to nuclear war, but he pointed out that it was completely unnecessary to add to the many good reasons against nuclear war, one which is simply not true. As Dudley's letter gained more and more traction with the public and could possibly affect future nuclear policy research, other experts began to speak out against it. Dudley would eventually respond to the criticism. He accepted some, but went on to suggest even more what-if scenarios. He suggested that a runaway reaction could still be possible. These days, scientists worry about how big and destructive nuclear weapons could become. We have to wonder, could a single bomb end the world? When the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima during World War II, it was 15 kilotons, which is equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT. While the Nagasaki bomb was 20 kilotons, the Hiroshima bomb devastated 13 kilometers squared of the city. It destroyed 63% of the buildings and killed at least 70,000 people. According to Dr. Tara Droshtenko, a director of the Global Security Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists, most current U.S. nuclear weapons are 15 to 20 times more powerful than those bombs. In 1961, the Soviet Union also tested the most powerful nuclear bomb ever made. They called it Tsar Bomba, and it was 50,000 kilotons, which is about 50 million tons of TNT. It resulted in a monstrous blast. Houses in the village of Severn, which was 55 kilometers or 34 miles away from the testing site at Mitsushika Bay, were destroyed. It had been initially designed to be twice as powerful. Researchers had scaled it back to try to mitigate the radiation effects. Droshtenko had explained that a bomb like that is just not practical for an arsenal. It's too big to be deployed, and it poses enormous risks for the crew that would have to drop it by plane. Droshtenko points out that had Tsar Bomba been dropped by plane, it's unlikely the aircraft would have been able to safely leave the area before it detonated. Dr. Bagalski isn't so sure that there's a large enough bomb to destroy the world. "All I know is that I hope we never go there," he says. And we have to agree with him. For the Soviet Union, by 1989, they had suspended any kind of nuclear weapons testing, which was for the best. We talked a lot about nuclear weapons, but let's revisit the idea of a years-long burning fire. 3 years isn't even the record for the longest burning fire. The most prolonged fire has been burning for what scientists believe to be 6,000 years. It's a place known as Burning Mountain, and you may not be surprised to learn it's in Australia. On top of all the jokes about animals that want to kill you, we can now note that they have natural burning fires that are over 6,000 years old. When explorers first came across it, they believed they had found a volcano. What they had actually found was a burning coal seam. It was in the 19th century that scientists realized what it really was. The fire's estimated to be around 30 meters or 100 feet below ground. It must have ignited somehow in the past and continues to be burning to this day. The oldest man-made fire, however, is roughly 1,500 years old. It's located in Yazd-e-Tash-Behram in Iran, and it's been burning since the time of the Romans. It had been carefully kept alight by ancient Zoroastrian priests. They revered the fire as sacred. It's one of the world's oldest religions, and it continues in modern day in Iran. One of the sects of Zoroastrianism continues to tend to this fire to this day. You can visit this sacred fire, but non-Zoroastrian visitors are kept away from it with a partition. But you will be able to look at it, just make sure you keep a respectful distance. If you've ever played Silent Hill or watched its film adaptations, you probably remember the never-lifting fog that covers the town. Did you know that it was actually inspired by an ongoing underground fire? Silent Hill was inspired by a town in Pennsylvania called Centralia, and it's had a fire burning underneath it since 1962. The Silent Hill movie's co-writer Roger Avery had been inspired by the town after growing up and hearing stories about it from his father, a mining engineer. If you're wondering if anyone still lives there, they do, but not that many. Only a handful of people remain, as most of the townspeople fled the city. When you dig into the city's past, it was once a small but thriving mining community. Unfortunately, no one really knows what started the fire. Some hypothesize that the town's litter might be the culprit. For this explanation, let's look at Fire Underground, the ongoing tragedy of the Centralia mine fire by David DeCock. DeCock explains that the city council had proposed cleaning up the local landfill for Memorial Day in 1962. You might be asking, how could cleaning up a landfill lead to a fire? Well, their method of cleaning it up was by setting it on fire. Once the fire had consumed enough of the landfill's trash, the firefighters poured water on the fire until they no longer saw flames. Assuming their job was done, they left. Unbeknownst to them, the fire was still going underneath the trash's surface. The landfill had plenty of fuel to keep the fire going. That's why some believe the landfill fire is responsible for the tragedy. It was never officially confirmed, but it was thought that the mining tunnels supplied the fire with the oxygen it needed to thrive. Civil engineer Karina Kwame, featured in the Discovery documentary Massive Engineering Mistakes, explained, "Once the coal is lit, it's very hard to put it out, especially as it's anthracite coal. Initially, most of the townspeople were determined to stay in their homes. They had no plans to move out due to an underground fire. It was on February 14, 1981 that they changed their minds. Todd Dombowski, a 12-year-old boy, fell into a massive sinkhole in his parents' back garden. The young boy had headed over to investigate a strange cloud of smoke emitting from the ground. Don't worry, he survived. He was saved by his cousin who pulled him out, but it was enough to scare the locals. The underground fire had quickly become too extensive to extinguish, so the government could do little to save the town. Instead, the government officials reluctantly offered the residents a sum of money to move out. In the Silent Hill film, they take the reference even further by outright stating that Silent Hill had been abandoned 30 years prior due to a coal seam fire, the very thing that had forced many of the citizens of Centralia to evacuate. As of 2017, less than 5 residents remained in Centralia, but they had to fight for their right to stay there, winning a settlement with the state in 2013. Surprisingly, the residents don't own their properties, but they have won the right to live there. If you ever happen to visit Centralia, be sure to be respectful to the people already living there. The official government website for Centralia requests that visitors avoid littering, vandalizing, or stealing. Most of all, don't bother the remaining residents. Stick to exploring the road, paths, and abandoned areas. Fortunately, no one's felt the need to solve the problem with a nuclear bomb. In this case, we're pretty sure it would do a lot more harm than good. Now watch Real Reason Why the Soviet Union Collapsed, or Soviet Union Declassified UFO Encounters Revealed.